Some women scream when their hearts are broken. Others cry, beg, or plead for another chance. They hire lawyers, call family, post their pain for the world to see. But Elara, she didn't do any of that. When her husband of 8 years handed her divorce papers in front of his entire family, papers that would leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back, she didn't shed a single tear. She didn't argue. She didn't ask why. She simply picked up the pen and signed her name. Her husband thought he had won. His family thought she was broken. His new girlfriend thought she was pathetic. They all made the same mistake. They confused her silence for surrender. They mistook her calm for defeat. They assumed that because she never fought back, she had nothing to fight with. They had no idea that her silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. 14 months later, the sound of a helicopter landing on a building she now owned would echo across the city, and every person who had watched her sign those papers in humiliated silence would realize they had fundamentally misunderstood who Elara Vance truly was. But that realization would come far too late. Before we continue, please comment and tell us where you are watching from. Like and subscribe to our channel so you will be part of us as we post stories like this every day. Now let us continue. The Mercer family estate sat on 40 acres of manicured Kentucky land, a sprawling testament to 4 generations of bourbon money and carefully cultivated influence. The main house alone had 22 rooms, each decorated with antiques that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Crystal chandeliers hung from every ceiling. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors lined the hallways. The air itself seemed to smell of old money and older grudges. Elara had lived in this house for 8 years. She had never felt at home, not once, not for a single day. The family dining room was the largest in the house, with a table that seated 24 and a chandelier that had been imported from a French castle sometime in the 1920s. The window stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of the rolling hills and the distant bourbon warehouses that had made the Mercer fortune. Today, the room was full. Victor Mercer sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly combed, his posture rigid despite his 72 years. His expression was one of barely contained contempt, the look of a man who had spent his entire life being obeyed and saw no reason why today should be any different. His wife, Catherine, sat beside him, her face frozen in the pleasant smile she wore like armor. She had perfected that smile over 40 years of marriage, a mask that revealed nothing and protected everything. Their eldest son, Harrison, lounged in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no. He was already on his 3rd bourbon of the afternoon, swirling the amber liquid in a crystal glass that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. He looked bored, as if his sister-in-law's humiliation was merely a mild entertainment before dinner. And then there was Graham. Graham Mercer, Elara's husband, stood at the far end of the table. He was still handsome, she supposed, in the way that expensive grooming and good genetics could make almost anyone handsome. His suit was custom-tailored, his watch was Swiss, his confidence was absolute. But the cruelty that had always lurked behind his eyes was no longer hidden. Today he let it shine. Today he wanted her to see it. "Elara," Graham said, sliding a thick document across the polished mahogany. The paper made a soft hissing sound against the wood. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Elara looked at the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words swam before her eyes, though her face remained perfectly still. She had known this was coming. She had known for months. But seeing it in black and white, feeling the weight of 47 pages designed to erase her from this family's history, still felt like a blow to the chest. She didn't let it show. "The terms are straightforward," continued Graham's lawyer, a thin man named Patterson, who had been the Mercer family's legal attack dog for 30 years. His voice was flat, professional, utterly devoid of empathy. He had done this 100 times before. To him, Elara was just another inconvenience to be disposed of. Given the prenuptial agreement Mrs. Mercer signed prior to the marriage, she is entitled to no spousal support, no claim on Mercer family assets, and no stake in Mercer Bourbon Enterprises. She will vacate the family property within 72 hours. "What she will receive," Graham interrupted, clearly enjoying himself, "is the opportunity to leave with her dignity intact. No public scandal, no messy court battles, a clean break." He smiled, and it was the smile of a cat watching a mouse it had already caught. I think that's more than fair, considering the circumstances. How generous, Harrison drawled, examining his fingernails, considering what she could leave with, which is, let me check my notes, absolutely nothing. The family laughed. Catherine's laugh was a delicate tinkle. Harrison's was a bark. Victor didn't laugh at all. Victor simply watched Elara with cold, calculating eyes. Elara had learned to read Victor over the years. He was the true power in this room. Graham was cruel, but he was also weak, easily manipulated by whoever held his leash. Victor held that leash. Victor had always held that leash. Victor decided when Graham could spend money, when he could travel, when he could marry, and now, apparently, when he could divorce. And Victor, unlike his son, was not laughing. He was studying her, looking for something, a crack in her composure, a hint of what she might do next. She gave him nothing. Do you have anything to say? Graham asked, leaning forward with theatrical concern. Any questions for the attorney? Any objections you'd like to raise before we make this official? Elara looked at the document. 47 pages detailing exactly how worthless the Mercer family considered her. 8 years of marriage reduced to a signature line and a 72-hour eviction notice. She thought about the years, the endless, grinding years, the dinners where she was seated at the far end of the table, away from business discussions, expected to smile and nod and contribute nothing of substance. The parties where she was introduced as Graham's wife and then promptly ignored while the real conversations happened in other rooms. The nights when Graham would come home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, and she would say nothing because saying something meant punishment. She thought about the first time he had grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave bruises. It had been 6 months into their marriage. She had asked him politely if perhaps they could spend a weekend away from the family. Just the two of them. He had grabbed her wrist and squeezed until she gasped, his face twisted with sudden rage. You don't make requests, he had said. You don't have opinions. You exist because I allow you to exist. She thought about the way Catherine had looked at those bruises the next morning, the way her mother-in-law's eyes had flickered down to Elara's wrist, then back up to her face, the way Catherine had said nothing, done nothing, simply looked away and continued eating her breakfast as if nothing had happened. She thought about the time Harrison had locked her in the wine cellar for 4 hours during a family gathering, claiming it was an accident, a joke, nothing serious. And everyone had laughed when she was finally released, shaking and pale, tears streaming down her face. Can't take a joke, can she? Harrison had said, and Graham had laughed along with everyone else. 8 years of being told she was nothing. 8 years of being invisible. 8 years of silence. No questions, Elara said. Her voice was soft as it always was. May I have a pen? Graham's smile flickered with surprise, then broadened with triumph. He had expected begging, tears, perhaps a desperate attempt to negotiate, to claim some small piece of the fortune she had helped maintain through 8 years of social events, charitable committees, and careful reputation management. Her immediate surrender was even better than he had hoped. Of course, he produced a fountain pen from his jacket, the same pen he had used to sign their marriage certificate 8 years ago. A deliberate cruelty, a final twist of the knife. The pen that had bound her would now set him free. Patterson cleared his throat. Mrs. Mercer, I should advise you that once you sign this document, you waive all rights to contest the terms. You'll have no legal recourse to challenge the settlement, no appeals, no second chances. Do you understand? I understand, Elara said. She took the pen. Across the room, someone shifted. A woman Elara had been pretending not to see. Young, perhaps 25, blonde, with the kind of carefully maintained beauty that required hours of daily effort. Wearing a dress that cost more than Elara's entire wardrobe. Madison Ashby, the woman Graham had been seeing for the past year, the woman everyone knew about but no one acknowledged. Madison caught Elara's eye and smirked. It was the smirk of someone who had won, who had taken another woman's husband and felt nothing but triumph. Elara turned back to the document. She flipped to the final page, found the signature line, and signed her name in careful, precise letters. Elara Marie Vance, not Mercer. She had never legally taken his name, a small rebellion that no one had noticed for 8 years, a tiny act of defiance that she had kept hidden, even from herself sometimes, waiting for the day it might matter. She set down the pen and stood. "Is that all?" The room was silent. Graham stared at her, something flickering behind his eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or disappointment that his final victory hadn't been more satisfying. He had wanted her to cry, to beg, to make him feel powerful one last time. She gave him nothing. "You have 72 hours to vacate," Patterson said, recovering first. "Any personal effects left behind will be disposed of." "I won't need 72 hours, Elara replied. "I'll be gone within the hour." She walked toward the door. "Elara." Victor's voice stopped her. It was the first time he had spoken since she entered the room. She turned. Victor Mercer was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Something between suspicion and curiosity. "Where will you go?" It was a strange question. No one had asked her that. No one had cared enough to wonder what would happen to her after she walked out that door. She was being discarded, thrown away like a broken tool, and no one had even considered where the broken pieces might land. "Home," she said simply. Then she walked out of the dining room, out of the house, and out of the life that had never wanted her in the first place. Behind her, she heard Graham say something to Madison that made everyone laugh. She kept walking. There was a time before she was Mrs. Graham Mercer when Elara Vance had been someone else entirely. She had grown up in a small town in Vermont, the only child of a quiet father who carved wooden furniture and a mother who passed away when Elara was 7. Her father had raised her alone in a small workshop behind their house, teaching her the value of patience, the importance of watching before speaking, and the power of letting other people underestimate you. "The loudest person in the room is usually the most afraid," he would say, sanding down a table leg with methodical care, the sawdust catching the afternoon light like gold dust. "Noise is just fear wearing a costume. Real strength doesn't need to announce itself. Real strength just does the work." Her father had also taught her about money, not how to spend it, but how to grow it. In the evenings after the workshop closed, he would spread financial newspapers across the kitchen table and teach her to read stock charts, to understand compound interest, to see patterns where others saw chaos. "Money is just stored time," he would explain, pointing to columns of numbers. "When you invest wisely, you're saving time for your future self. You're giving future Elara options that present Elara can't even imagine yet." By the time she was 16, Elara had turned a small inheritance from her mother into a modest investment portfolio. By the time she graduated from college with a degree in finance, that portfolio had grown considerably larger. Not enough to make her rich, but enough to make her independent, enough to give her options. She had never told Graham about the money. She had never told anyone. When she met Graham Mercer at a charity gala in New York, she had been working as a junior analyst at a small investment firm. She was quiet, unassuming, the kind of woman who blended into the background at parties, the kind of woman people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. Graham had been drawn to her precisely because she didn't fawn over him like other women did. Her silence intrigued him. Her stillness was a mirror in which he could admire his own reflection without interruption. She didn't challenge him. She didn't compete with him. She simply existed, calm and quiet, and let him be the center of attention. He had pursued her with the single-minded focus of a man who always got what he wanted. And when he proposed, 6 months after their first meeting, she had said yes. Not because she loved him. She had known even then that Graham was incapable of love, at least not the kind of love that involves seeing another person as an equal. She had said yes because she was tired. Tired of struggling, tired of being alone, tired of the relentless grind of proving herself in a world that didn't want to see her. The Mercer family represented security, stability, a life where she wouldn't have to fight for every inch of ground. She had miscalculated. The security came with a price. The price was herself. From the moment she entered the Mercer household, she was diminished. Catherine assigned her to charitable committees that involved nothing but addressing envelopes and arranging flowers. Graham controlled her access to money, giving her an allowance like a child. Harrison made a game of humiliating her at family gatherings, testing how far he could push before she pushed back. She never did, and Victor watched it all with cold amusement, like a scientist observing an experiment. But worse than the family was Graham himself. He wasn't violent at first. He was something worse. He was erosive. Every day, in small ways, he ground her down. A comment about her clothes. A sigh when she spoke at dinner. A raised eyebrow when she expressed an opinion. The silent treatment that could last for days if she displeased him. And when words weren't enough, he escalated. The first time he grabbed her arm, she told herself it was an accident. The second time, she told herself it was her fault. She had said something wrong, done something to provoke him. The third time, she stopped telling herself anything at all. She simply accepted it, the way one accepts the weather or the turning of seasons. This was her life now. This was what she had chosen. She learned to be invisible, to anticipate his moods, to make herself so small, so quiet, so absent that perhaps he would forget she existed. And while she disappeared, her mind remained active. Every quarter, the Mercer family accountant sent a financial summary to all family members. It was a formality, a reminder of how wealthy they all were. No one actually read it. It was junk mail to them, another piece of paper to be filed and forgotten. Elara read it. She read every page, every footnote, every subsidiary and holding company and line of credit. She built a mental map of the Mercer empire, understanding its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. She learned which distributors they depended on, which suppliers they couldn't replace, which contracts were coming up for renewal, which executives were unhappy, and she kept investing, quietly, anonymously, through a trust her father had helped her establish before he passed away, a trust that held her childhood investments, her mother's inheritance, and every dollar she had managed to save from her meager allowance over 8 years. The trust was called Silentium Holdings, Latin for silence. No one knew it existed. No one knew that Silentium Holdings had spent the past 5 years quietly acquiring small stakes in companies that competed with Mercer Bourbon. No one knew that Elara had identified the family's biggest vulnerability, their complete dependence on a single aging distribution network that had gone unchanged for 40 years. No one knew that she had been building relationships with logistics companies, packaging manufacturers, retail partners, all the invisible infrastructure that made the bourbon industry function. No one knew because Elara never spoke. She just watched and waited and planned until the day Graham handed her divorce papers and the waiting finally came to an end. Elara Vance vanished from Kentucky society like smoke in the wind. Graham didn't notice at first. He was too busy enjoying his freedom, parading Madison around town, announcing their engagement a mere 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The society pages were full of photos, Graham and Madison at the country club, Graham and Madison at the charity ball, Graham and Madison at the yacht club, at the horse races, at every event designed to show the world that Graham Mercer had moved on and moved up. No one mentioned Elara. It was as if she had never existed. Victor noticed. "Where did she go?" he asked Graham one evening, swirling bourbon in his glass. They were in the study, the room where real business was conducted, away from the women and the servants. Graham shrugged. "Who cares? Back to whatever backwater she crawled out of, probably. Why do you ask?" Victor didn't answer, but something about Elara's departure bothered him. It had been too clean, too easy. In his 72 years, Victor had learned that people who had nothing to lose didn't surrender without a fight, and people who surrendered without a fight usually had something hidden, something they didn't want you to see while they were making their exit. He had Patterson run a background check. The results were unremarkable. Elara Vance, born in Vermont, orphaned at 22 when her father passed away, modest career in finance before marrying Graham. No family, no assets, no connections, nothing. Victor filed away his unease and returned to business. But the business, he would soon discover, was about to become very complicated. It started with a phone call. Graham was in his office at Mercer Bourbon headquarters when his assistant interrupted a meeting with the marketing team. "Sir, there's a call from Jack Reynolds at Delta Distribution. He says it's urgent." Graham frowned. Delta was their primary distributor for the Southeast region, a territory that accounted for nearly 40% of their total sales. They had a contract that went back 30 years, to the days when Victor had personally negotiated the terms over cigars and handshakes. What could possibly be urgent? He excused himself from the meeting and picked up the phone. "Jack, what's going on?" "Graham, I wanted to give you a heads up before the official announcement." Jack's voice was strained, apologetic. "We've been acquired." "Acquired? By whom?" "A company called Silentium Holdings. Never heard of them before last month, but they made an offer the board couldn't refuse. Triple our market valuation. They're restructuring our client contracts." Graham felt a flicker of unease. "Restructuring how?" "They're not renewing the Mercer agreement." The unease became a cold knot in his stomach. "That's not possible. We have a contract." "Had a contract. It expired last quarter. We've been operating month to month while negotiating renewal terms. Silentium is prioritizing their own distribution partners." "I'm sorry, Graham. It's just business." Graham slammed down the phone. Just business. 3 words that meant the end of 40% of their Southeast distribution. Finding a replacement would take months. It would cost millions. It would disrupt their supply chain during peak season, right before the holidays when bourbon sales hit their annual high. He called his father. Victor listened in silence, then said, "Find out everything you can about Silentium Holdings." By the end of the week, they had their answer, and it made no sense. Silentium Holdings was a ghost, a Delaware LLC with no public face, no website, no known leadership. It had been quietly acquiring small companies for years, transportation firms, logistics providers, packaging manufacturers, all operating in sectors adjacent to the alcohol distribution industry. Individually, these acquisitions were unremarkable, small deals that barely registered in the business press. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone was building an alternative distribution network. Someone who understood the bourbon industry intimately. Someone who knew exactly where the Mercer family was vulnerable. "This is a hostile play," Victor said grimly. "Someone is coming after us specifically. This isn't random. This is targeted." "But who?" Graham demanded. "We don't have enemies. Not like this. Not someone with this kind of money and planning." Victor thought of Elara's calm face as she signed the divorce papers, her soft voice saying she would be gone within the hour. The way she had walked out without looking back, without crying, without making a single demand. It couldn't be her. She was nobody. She had nothing. And yet, "Find her," Victor said. 3 months passed before they found her. Not in Vermont, not in poverty, not in the circumstances they had imagined, waiting tables or living in some cramped apartment, regretting the day she had walked away from Mercer money. The Kentucky Bourbon Summit was the industry's premier annual event, held at the historic Seelbach Hotel in Louisville. Every major player in American spirits attended. CEOs, master distillers, investors, politicians, all gathered under crystal chandeliers to network, negotiate, and celebrate the industry that had made them wealthy. The Mercers had been keynote speakers for the past decade. This year, the keynote was different. Graham stood in the crowded ballroom, a glass of his own bourbon in hand, watching the stage where the event organizers were preparing to introduce the evening's featured speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, "it is my honor to introduce a new voice in our industry. She represents a fresh vision for the future of American spirits, a commitment to sustainability, ethical production, and market innovation. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Silentium Spirits, Elara Vance." The glass slipped from Graham's fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, bourbon splashing across his Italian leather shoes, but he didn't notice. He couldn't look away from the stage. She emerged from the wings and she was unrecognizable. Gone was the mousy woman in modest clothes who had sat silently at the end of the family table. In her place stood someone who commanded the room simply by existing. She wore a tailored black suit that fit her like armor, emphasizing the strength she had always hidden. Her dark hair was swept back in an elegant chignon. Around her neck was a simple pendant, a single diamond that caught the light with quiet fire. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. They were no longer downcast, no longer avoiding contact, no longer scanning for threats and disapproval. They swept the room with calm authority. And when they found Graham in the crowd, they didn't flinch. They simply acknowledged him the way one might acknowledge a piece of furniture, and moved on. "Thank you for that generous introduction," Elara said, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. It was still soft, but there was steel beneath the softness now. "I know many of you are wondering who I am and where Silentium spirits came from. I'll give you the short version. I spent the past decade watching this industry operate. I saw inefficiencies, I saw opportunities, and I saw a market ready for change." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her displayed a map of the United States covered in distribution routes, glowing lines connecting cities like a nervous system. Silentium Holdings has spent the past 5 years building an integrated supply chain. Transportation, logistics, packaging, retail partnerships. As of last month, we have the infrastructure to distribute spirits to every major market in the country, independently of existing networks. Graham felt the blood drain from his face. He looked around. The other bourbon executives were staring at the map with expressions ranging from concern to outright fear. They understood what she was showing them, an alternative to the established order, a way to bypass the old guard entirely. "Starting next quarter, Silentium Spirits will launch our flagship bourbon line. We're not here to compete with you." Elara smiled, and there was something sharp in that smile, something that made Graham's stomach clench. "We're here to give consumers a choice between the old way of doing business and a new way, a way that doesn't rely on handshake deals and inherited monopolies, a way that rewards innovation instead of legacy." She paused, letting her words settle over the room like a fine mist. "I look forward to working alongside all of you. And for those who prefer to work against me," she found Graham's eyes again, "I welcome the competition." The applause was thunderous. The industry had just witnessed a declaration of independence, and half the room was already calculating how to align themselves with this new power. Graham pushed through the crowd toward the stage, but by the time he reached it, Elara was gone. Surrounded by a phalanx of assistants and security, she had vanished through a side door. He stood there alone, surrounded by competitors who were already whispering about Silentium, about distribution deals, about the future that no longer included the Mercer family at its center. For the first time in his life, Graham Mercer felt afraid. It took Graham 2 weeks to arrange a meeting, 2 weeks of calls that went unreturned, emails that bounced back, assistants who politely but firmly declined every request. Finally, he played his last card. He sent a message through an intermediary, a mutual acquaintance who owed him a favor. The message was simple. "I just want to talk." To his surprise, she agreed. The meeting was set for neutral ground, a private dining room at a restaurant in downtown Louisville. Graham arrived early, rehearsing his approach. He would apologize. He would appeal to their shared history. He would offer partnership, merger, whatever she wanted. The important thing was to stop the bleeding before Silentium destroyed everything his family had built. Elara arrived exactly on time. She was alone, which surprised him. No lawyers, no security, just her in a simple gray dress, taking the seat across from him as calmly as if they were strangers meeting for the first time. "Graham," she said, just his name. No warmth, no hostility, nothing. "Elara," he tried to smile. "You look different." "Do I?" "Successful, powerful." He spread his hands, a gesture of openness he didn't feel. "I had no idea you had all this inside you. If I had known, what would you have done differently?" The question stopped him. He had prepared for anger, for gloating, for the satisfaction of revenge. He hadn't prepared for this quiet, direct challenge. "I would have treated you better, obviously." "Obviously." She took a sip of water. "But you didn't know, so you treated me the way you treat things you consider worthless. You threw me away when I was no longer useful." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Her voice remained calm. "But I didn't ask to meet with you to discuss the past. The past is settled. I signed your papers. We're divorced. What's done is done." "Then why did you agree to meet?" "Because I wanted to see if you understood yet." "Understood what?" Elara leaned forward slightly. "Graham, when you handed me those divorce papers in front of your family, you made a calculation. You looked at me and saw a woman with no money, no connections, no power. You concluded that I was worthless, that I had nothing, that I could be discarded without consequence. I was wrong. I can see that now. No, you can't. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, something closer to pity. You think you understand because I have money now, because I have power. You think the lesson is don't underestimate people because they might secretly be rich. What's the lesson then? The lesson is that you never actually saw me. She sat back. In 8 years of marriage, you never once asked me what I thought about anything. You never asked about my childhood, my education, my interests, my dreams. You talked at me, around me, through me. I was furniture to you, decoration, something to possess, not someone to know. Graham opened his mouth to protest, but she raised a hand. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because it's relevant to what happens next. She pulled a slim folder from her bag and set it on the table. This is a proposal. Graham reached for it eagerly. A proposal meant negotiation. Negotiation meant there was still a chance. He opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a letter of intent. Silentium Holdings offered to acquire Mercer Bourbon Enterprises for 30% below current market valuation. The Mercer family would retain no ownership stake, no board seats, no influence. The name would be retired. The brand would be absorbed. This is an insult, Graham said, his voice rising. You're offering to buy us out at a discount after what you've done to our distribution network? I'm offering you an exit before things get worse. Worse? What else can you possibly do? Elara's expression didn't change. Graham, in the next 6 months, I will systematically acquire or enter into exclusive partnerships with every remaining distributor your company relies on. I will recruit your master distillers by offering them equity stakes they could never dream of under your family's employment. I will fund a marketing campaign highlighting the ethical issues in your supply chain, the labor violations at your Kentucky facility, the environmental citations you've been paying off for years, the harassment settlements that never made it to court. Graham went pale. How do you know about... I know everything. She stood up. I spent 8 years being invisible in your house. Do you have any idea how much people say in front of someone they consider furniture? Your family conducted business at the dinner table for years. I listened. I remembered. I prepared. She picked up her bag. The offer is valid for 30 days. After that, I won't be buying. I'll be building over your ruins. This is revenge, Graham spat. This is about the divorce, about hurting me. Elara paused at the door. She turned back, and for a moment her expression softened into something almost like sadness. No, Graham. If I wanted revenge, I would have destroyed you publicly. I would have released the photographs of the bruises you left on my arms. I would have told everyone about the time you pushed me down the stairs and told your mother I was clumsy. I would have burned your reputation the way you tried to burn my spirit. Graham's face went white. But I don't want revenge. I want to build something that matters. And unfortunately, your family is standing on land I need. She opened the door. This isn't personal, Graham. It's just business. And you taught me that business is all that matters. She walked out. Graham sat alone in the private dining room, staring at the letter of intent, feeling the walls of his entire world beginning to crumble. The next 6 months unfolded exactly as Elara had promised. One by one, the pillars of the Mercer Empire collapsed. Their last major distributor signed with Silentium. Their head distiller, a man who had been with the family for 30 years, quietly resigned and resurfaced at Elara's new facility in Tennessee. An investigative journalist published a series on labor practices in the bourbon industry, and Mercer was featured prominently in every installment. Victor Mercer had a heart attack in October. He survived, but he was forced to step back from daily operations, leaving Graham in charge of a company that was bleeding from every wound. Madison left him in December. She took the engagement ring and a severance payment negotiated by her lawyer, a woman who had cut her teeth on high-profile divorces. Graham couldn't even blame her. He had nothing left to offer. In January, the board of directors voted to accept Silentium's acquisition offer. The final price was 40% below market value, even lower than Elara's original proposal. The Mercer family retained nothing. Graham was allowed to attend the signing ceremony, A courtesy, he was told, a chance to say goodbye. The conference room at Silentium's new headquarters was nothing like the dark mahogany chambers of Mercer tradition. It was bright, modern, full of windows and natural light. The table was simple white oak. The chairs were comfortable but unpretentious. Elara sat at the head of the table, flanked by her legal team. She wore a white blouse and dark slacks. No jewelry except for her watch, a simple silver piece that Graham had never seen before. She looked, he thought, like someone who had stopped performing, someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. "Graham," she said as he entered, "thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" "There's always a choice." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit." The signing took less than 20 minutes. Documents were exchanged, notarized, witnessed. 200 years of Mercer family legacy reduced to ink and paper. When it was done, Elara's team filed out, leaving them alone. "Why?" Graham asked. His voice was hoarse. "Why all of this? You could have just walked away. Started your own company without destroying mine." "Could I have?" "Yes. You had the money, the knowledge. You didn't need to tear us down." Elara considered this for a moment. "Do you remember our wedding reception?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Your father gave a toast. Do you remember what he said?" Graham shook his head. "He said, 'Welcome to the family, Elara. You'll find that the Mercers take care of our own.'" She smiled slightly. "I thought that meant something. I thought it meant I was being welcomed, protected, valued. It took me 2 years to understand what it really meant. It meant that I was property now, that I belonged to the family and the family would decide what to do with me. And when I was no longer useful," she shrugged, "the family discarded me." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "You asked why I didn't just walk away. The answer is that I tried. When I left your house with nothing but my laptop bag, I had every intention of disappearing, starting over, forgetting." She turned back to face him. "But then I realized something. Your family was going to keep doing what they did to me, to employees, to competitors, to anyone who couldn't fight back. You treat people as disposable because you've never faced consequences, because your money and your name have always protected you. So this is punishment." "No." She shook her head. "Punishment would be personal. This is correction. Your family had power they didn't deserve and used it to hurt people who couldn't defend themselves. I'm redistributing that power to people who will use it better. And you get to decide who deserves power? Someone has to. Your family decided for 200 years. Now it's my turn." She picked up a folder from the table and handed it to him. "This is information about a job opportunity. A small distillery in Oregon is looking for a sales representative. It's entry level. The pay is modest, but it's honest work." Graham stared at the folder. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to start over, to learn what it's like to build something instead of inheriting it, to earn respect instead of demanding it." She walked toward the door. "Whether you take it is up to you." "And if I don't? If I fight this?" Elara paused at the threshold. She looked back at him, and for just a moment, he saw something in her eyes that might have been compassion. "Then you'll lose. And you'll keep losing until you understand that the world has changed and you have to change with it." She opened the door. "Goodbye, Graham. I hope for your sake that you figure it out." She walked out. Graham sat alone in the bright conference room, holding a folder that contained his entire future, wondering how he had spent 8 years married to this woman and never seen her at all. 5 years later, the former Mercer estate was unrecognizable. The main house had been converted into a rehabilitation center for survivors of domestic abuse. The 22 rooms that had once hosted cold family dinners now provided shelter, counseling, and job training for women rebuilding their lives. The 40 acres of manicured lawn had been transformed into a working farm, growing organic produce that supplied local food banks. A small vineyard occupied the eastern slope, producing wine that funded the center's operations. In the center of the property, where the formal garden had once featured a marble fountain imported from Italy, there was now a simple wooden bench surrounded by wildflowers. Elara sat on that bench, watching the sunset paint the Kentucky sky in shades of orange and gold. She came here once a year, on the anniversary of the day she had signed the divorce papers. not to gloat, not to remember her triumph, but to remind herself of how far she had traveled and how far she still had to go. "Ms. Vance?" A young woman approached, clipboard in hand. "The donors are arriving for the gala." Elara smiled and stood. "Thank you, Maya. I'll be right there." Maya hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The women here, they always want to know your story, how you went from where you were to where you are now. What do you tell them?" Elara considered the question. She looked out over the gardens, at the women walking the paths, at the children playing on the lawn that had once been silent and sterile. "I tell them that silence isn't the same as weakness," she said finally. "I tell them that patience isn't the same as acceptance. And I tell them that the people who underestimate you are giving you an advantage they don't even realize." "Is that all?" "No." Elara turned to face her. "I also tell them that the goal isn't revenge. Revenge keeps you trapped in the past, fighting battles that are already over. The goal is to build something better, something that matters, something that helps the people coming after you." She gestured to the estate around them. "This isn't a monument to my success. It's a tool for their recovery. Every dollar this organization earns, every life it changes, every woman who walks out of here stronger than she walked in, that's the point. Not proving that I was right and they were wrong, but proving that what they threw away had value, and using that value to help people who need it." Maya nodded slowly. "The women are going to love that." "I hope so." Elara began walking toward the main house, then paused. "Maya, one more thing." "Yes?" "If any of them want to learn about investing, about building businesses, about gaining financial independence, send them to me. Not everyone will want it. But for those who do," she smiled, "I have a few things to teach." In a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, a man sat at a kitchen table reading a letter. The apartment was modest, clean, but sparse. The furniture was secondhand. The view from the window was a brick wall. It was nothing like the estate where he had grown up, nothing like the penthouse he had once called home. Graham, just Graham now, he had stopped using the family name years ago, set down the letter and rubbed his eyes. It was from a lawyer informing him that Elara had established an educational trust in his daughter's name. His daughter from his second marriage, a quiet union to a woman he had met at the distillery where he worked. The trust would cover college, graduate school, whatever she needed. There was no note from Elara, no message. Just the dry legal language explaining the terms. Graham looked at the letter for a long time. He had not spoken to Elara in 5 years. He had not asked for her help. He had not expected anything from her. He had taken the job she offered, hated it at first, then gradually learned to find satisfaction in honest work and modest achievement. He had remarried, had a daughter, built a small life that bore no resemblance to the empire he had once expected to inherit. He had also, slowly and painfully, come to understand what she had tried to tell him in that conference room. The world had changed. He had changed with it. And in changing, he had finally begun to see the people around him as people. Not as furniture, not as possessions, not as things to be used and discarded. He picked up a pen and a piece of paper. He wrote a short note. "Elara, thank you, not just for the trust, but for everything. I understand now what you were trying to teach me. I'm sorry it took so long. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope the garden is blooming. Graham." He sealed the envelope and set it aside to mail in the morning. Outside, the Oregon rain began to fall, washing the streets clean, preparing the earth for new growth. Elara Vance didn't win because she was louder than her opponents. She didn't win because she was crueler or more ruthless. She won because she understood something that the Mercer family never grasped, that true power isn't about domination. It's about building something that lasts. She turned her pain into purpose, her silence into strategy, her isolation into independence. And in the end, she proved that the quietest person in the room is often the one you should be paying the most attention to. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated? Did you prove them wrong loudly, or did you let your success speak for itself? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification button so you will be notified when we post our next story.